Hello and welcome to Bo Beats. My name is Bo and this is a channel about music production, synthesizers and creativity. So in this video we are going to talk about what hardware synthesizer to choose for your DAW. And obviously the answer is that you kind of approach the DAW, move up to it, you ask like, hey baby, what do you want? What kind of synthesizer do you like? What kind of hardware? I often get questions about what synth to buy and more specifically what synthesizers works good with certain DAW. So I thought I'd kind of summarize my thoughts on this topic in one video. Now, who is this video aimed towards? Well, I suppose it's aimed towards somebody who's a little bit of a beginner or somebody who is on a budget. So if you have all the knowledge you need and you know exactly what you want to buy, this video isn't probably for you. Or if you have an abundance of money, you know, money isn't an issue, maybe my buyer's advice isn't, valuable to you. But if you're a beginner and you're on a budget, perhaps some of my advice can be good for you. Let's start by getting the obvious stuff out of the way. Tastes will vary. Needs are different. We all approach music in a different way. We work in different genres. We even have different styles within those genres. There are subgenres. We have different workflows. We have different equipment to start with. So of course there's no answer that fits everybody. But what I have done is I've tried to categorize 3 things that I think you should consider when looking at a hardware synthesizer for your computer setup. What are DAWs actually good at? Well, DAWs are good at a number of things. They excel at certain things. They're good for sequencing, both MIDI and audio data. They are good for cutting up samples, tweaking samples. They are good for long recordings of audio. They are good for sending modulations, for example, changes to cutoff, changes to LFOs and so on. They are great because everything is so visual on it. And if you have some kind of hardware controller to go along with your DAW, it becomes even easier to do these kind of controls. I mean, there's good reason why professionals use DAWs. They are fast, instant recall, everything is super cleanly laid out. It's easy to see what kind of modulations you have automated onto your tracks and so on. Everything's very smooth. So where does this lead us in terms of what hardware synths to get? Well, it shows us that certain hardware synths are not a perfect match to be using with a DAW. Products like the Novation Circuit, the Electribe from Korg, the Electron products, they are all awesome products. But because they have internal sequencers that are so good, they don't really take advantage of the strengths of a DAW. Because a DAW is really good at sequencing stuff, and you kind of already have that on those physical hardware synthesizers. Now, before you go all keyboard warrior and start typing away and telling me how wrong I am and how good these products are, don't worry. I love these products. I have these products. I have the Electron stuff over here. I have pretty much all their new toys. And I have 2 circuits as well. So you can definitely say I like these products. I use them with the computer, but I use the onboard sequencing capabilities of these synthesizers / groove boxes, and that's why I love them. But if you're short on money, and if you're a beginner, I would say focus on one sequencer, and that should be a DAW, and buy a synthesizer where the money you're spending goes into the sound and not into, say, sequencing capabilities, because you don't really need them. This is why. It's not that it's a bad product. It's not that I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, I usually recommend Electron stuff and Novation stuff and even Korg stuff. But for a beginner who's starved on money, you should focus on synthesizers that deliver most sound for the money and not additional sequencing power. So what are actually useful features that you should consider when looking at a hardware synthesizer? Well, that brings us to point number 2, because if I didn't say it, the last part about not buying stuff with excessive functions that you don't really need, that was point 1. Point number 2 is to buy something that takes advantage of your DAW's great automation capabilities. So what is automation? Well, automation is the process from which you can record, say, a knob movement from your hardware synthesizer into your DAW. And this knob twisting is then sent back to your hardware synthesizer. For example, it could be that you record a filter sweep on a lead sound, for example. And this is recorded into the DAW and then sent back to the synthesizer. So because that's something that really adds to the process, that you simply can play something, you can record the filter sweeps and save it inside the computer. And I think that this is really something that adds to the workflow, because if you can't automate these parameters, you have to manually twist the knob every time you want to create a sweep or set up some kind of automation on the synthesizer itself. But this is something that often takes away from the fast workflow of a DAW, the instant recall thing that makes the DAW so powerful. This means that you should be buying a synthesizer with digital controls that can send and receive CC messages. And just to compare a few products on this very point, the Minilogue, for example, has digital controls, so you can easily send a filter sweep or a change to the LFO, a CC automation into, or CC value into the DAW and send it back as the automation and send it back to actually affect the knobs. And this works very well with my DAWs, Cubase, and with my Maschine DAW. And the Bass Station 2 that you can see up here, it also has digital controls, so it's very easy to record filter sweeps and so on into the DAW. And that's something that I think is hugely important. But we can also contrast this against something that does not have digital controls. This is the Moog Sub 37. It's an awesome synthesizer, but it does not have digital controls. You don't have control over all the parameters via MIDI, or it doesn't have USB. This makes it so that you have to manually set most things when you want to use it with your DAW or record it in any situation. This is more old school. It's really interesting and fun, but it's not the perfect choice to be using with a DAW, according to my point number 2 here anyway. But before we discard this synthesizer, we have to look at point number 3. You should be buying something that really adds to your sound palette. And this is why I often recommend analog synthesizer. Now I know analog synthesizers are the new thing, it's all the rage, it's a bit of hype, and it'll probably die down, and there's nothing wrong with digital synths, but I will kind of explain why I think you should look at analog synths first. Computers have great virtual instruments. They sound amazing, they're a great bang for the buck. So I think if you should be buying expensive hardware, you should really buy something that adds to the sound palette, that does things that is harder to emulate. And you can have difference of opinion here, but analog synths, at least in theory, should be a little bit harder to emulate than a digital synth, no? Damn it, I just realized there's no way out of this. Whatever I say will piss somebody off, the purists, the VST people. So what I'm saying is just that analog synths add a little bit more to my sound palette than does a digital synthesizer. I think it's easier to change out a digital synth for a VST than taking my Moog Sub 37 and going to Monarch, for example, from Native Instruments, and saying like, yeah, these two are comparable, because I don't think they are in terms of dynamic range, in terms of sound quality and so on. So I think there's a big difference. And this brings me back to the Mother 32 that I was talking about. The Mother 32 sitting over here. While it doesn't have the digital controls that I was talking about earlier, it does have a very specific sound, and it just the thing with the tuning, that it might not be perfectly tuned all the time, adds character in a world where we often struggle to find like a personal touch. If you listen to a lot of the new music, I at least think that there's too much cleanliness. It's too linear. It's too perfect. I like a little bit of the rugged, not too much, but a little bit. And I think that analog synths bring that into my sound, at least. I can definitely hear a difference from when I'm working with my purely digital synths and using my full setup. I think there's a big difference of what I can achieve, and the sound of the LFOs and different kind of modulations. To my ear, it sounds very different than most of my virtual instruments. So these were my 3 points, but hold on, I have a 4th bonus point, and it has to do with voices. Basically, how many notes can I play at the same time? And I have a kind of controversial, perhaps, point of view here. I think that if you're a beginner with a small budget, you can easily stick with a mono synth, like the Bass Station 2, the Monologue, or if you want something more expensive, a Sub 37 or a Slim Fatty or something like that. And why is this? Why don't I recommend something like the OB6 or, you know, the big polyphonic flagships? Well, I simply think that polyphonic sounds, pads, pianos, for example, electric pianos, organs, so on, they are very nicely emulated or synthesized inside of a computer. I think that, for example, Omnisphere 2 works very well for pads, for example. You have all the native instruments, pianos. I mean, there's a ton of great sounding virtual instruments. And I don't really think that you need to spend like $2,000 on a big flagship polyphonic analog synthesizer for pads, for example. I think you can do it inside a computer. And these are just my opinions, of course, and you can disagree with them, but I think that if you're on a budget, you don't really need a lot of polyphony on an external hardware synthesizer. You can leave that to the computer because it does it really well. So in summary, don't buy something where your money is spent on external sequencers. Buy something with digital control, buy something that adds to your sound palette, and don't invest in too many voices in a hardware synthesizer. You know, that you can leave that to the computer. So I'm of course curious, what are your top advice for when picking out a hardware synthesizer? How do you choose what synth to get with your setup? Leave comments down below, because I think we can have a really nice discussion. And as always, these are just my opinions, and I'd love to hear yours. So this was Bo from Bo Beats. If you're interested in supporting me, hit the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel, and you can always head over to patreon.com/BoBeats if you want to support me further. So thank you so much for watching.